A good Erev Shabbos to all of you. I have to confess that in years past, I often had the aspiration that I would come and practice my Shabbos Hagadol Drasha in the shul on Erev Shabbos. I never thought that I actually would really deliver the Drasha on Erev Shabbos. I never did it as a practice, and now I'm doing it for real. It feels surreal. Definitely miss seeing you here as we prepare for Pesach together. A Shabbos Hagadol Drasha has to comprise several components. It's supposed to have a halacha l'maisa section. In the old days, people baked their own matzahs. They also had to know how to do hagalas kelim. They had to take care of sreivas chametz, burning of chametz. There were a lot of halachos to be mindful of, and it was necessary to encourage the community to be familiarized with the halachos prior to the onset of Pesach. In fact, there are many authorities who maintain that when Erev Pesach occurs on Shabbos, Erev Pesach Chalias b'Shabbos, the Shabbos Hagadol Drasha should take place the week before, so that people can properly carry out the halachos of Pesach. So there will be a section of halachos of Pesach, particularly some halachos that apply in this remarkable year that we are in. I will also, though, in keeping with tradition, have a halachic component to the drasha. That will be the beginning of the drasha, and a very, very brief agadic idea, and we'll close with a story. I was advised that when you give a video drasha, to make it not quite as lengthy as a live presentation, and so I'm going to heed the advice of the techies out there who have suggested that I not speak for the full hour that I normally do. There are source sheets that are available, and if you click on the email, you can take a look at the source sheets, but they'll only be there just to look at, not necessary to have the source sheets. You can listen to this shiur without making use of any source sheets whatsoever. I would like to discuss an idea that actually I wrote about a couple of years ago. I didn't speak about it, but I wrote a brief piece a couple of years ago in a publication called Lamdan, and I would like to build a little bit on that idea. There is a statement in the Talmud Yerushalmi that ha'ochel chametz be'erev Pesach ki'ilu bol arusaso bebeis chamav. Someone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach before the Seder, so such a person is considered as if he had an amorous relationship with his fiancée in his father-in-law's home. A very, very unusual way to express a halachic idea. Normally, if we have a question in halacha, we say that something is permitted or prohibited. It's mutter, it's asr. So if the Gemara wanted to say that you're not allowed to eat chametz, that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach, it should have said, don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. We want people to have an appetite for the matzah, but what's this unusual expression? And by the way, even though it's in the Talmud Yerushalmi, not in the Talmud Bavli, but this idea is codified in halacha. For example, the Tur quotes this idea in his code, and so it's clearly an important idea. So question number one is, why the strange formulation? Why not just say that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach? Why say that it's ki'ilu bol arasaso bebeis chamav? That's question number one. Question number two is, when the Gemara does make this statement that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach, what kind of matzah is it talking about? Is it talking about only shmura matzah, or is it talking about all kinds of matzah? So there is actually a machlokes, there is a disagreement. There are authorities like the Meiri and the Tosfos Rid that say that the prohibition of eating matzah on Erev Pesach applies only to shmura matzah, not to other kinds of matzah. Matzah that was watched from the time of harvesting, that from the time of the harvesting of the wheat, they made sure that it didn't come in contact with water. That's what's being discussed. The Tashbates, the Maram Chalava, others say that no, when the Gemara said that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach, it refers to all kinds of matzah. So these are the two questions that I want to address. Why the strange formulation, very evocative formulation of the halacha, and does this halacha apply to all matzah or just to shmura matzah? In order, I think, to address this question, a good place for us to start is the Gemara in Yevamis. The Gemara in Yevamis on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis discusses this question of what happens if a man has a relationship with his fiancée prior to the onset of marriage. What's the consequence of such a relationship, particularly if his fiancée becomes pregnant and she gives birth to a child? What's the halachic status of the child? So the Gemara actually records a dispute. The Gemara cites a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says that the child of such a union is considered to be a mamzer. Very, very strong designation to give to a child. As a general principle, a mamzer is really the result of a married woman having a relationship with a man and having a child from that union. That's the standard case of a mamzer. But Rav says that in this case also, a child between an engaged couple, that child will be labeled a mamzer. Shmuel disagrees, and Shmuel says that this child is called a shtuki. A shtuki is an individual whose paternal lineage is considered to be unknown, undetermined. Not exactly a good thing. There's a very obvious question. We know who the parents are in such a case. Such a child is neither a mamzer nor a shtuki. So what exactly are Rav and Shmuel arguing about? It seems strange. A child should be neither a mamzer nor a shtuki. So I think that there's a fundamental point that this Gemara is teaching us. The Gemara is telling us that an engaged couple who had such a relationship, it's not just that they did something that was immoral. It's not just that they did something that was improper. They did something that has halachic consequence. They did something that affects the destiny of this child. This child is forever labeled. And the same idea applies to matzah as well. Would we think, for example, that Erev Pesach, someone decides, I'm going to kindle candles, I'm going to light candles on Erev Pesach. Not for the purpose of lighting candles for the mitzvah, but just for, I want to light candles. And then a person comes before Yontif and lights candles appropriately. So does the fact that they lit candles the first time in any way take away from the lighting of candles that was done for the mitzvah? Most certainly not. Nothing wrong with doing that. So one might argue and say, listen, if I come to my Seder and I eat the prescribed amount of matzah that I'm supposed to eat, and I eat it in the prescribed time, and I eat it in the prescribed way, so then who cares that I ate matzah earlier? Shouldn't make any difference whatsoever. So it's not the case. Just as an engaged couple who has a child before their marriage has done something that impacts the child, so too, a person who eats matzah on Erev Pesach, it's not just that they've done something that's inappropriate. It's something that has a halachic consequence. We find in the Tshuvas HaGaonim, in the Tshuvas HaGaonim to Yevamis, that there's an explanation of the position of Rav. What exactly is it that is so terrible that in a case where two engaged people who have a child together, that their child is labeled a mamzer? Why is that? So the Tshuvas HaGaonim explains that when a woman becomes engaged, so at the moment that she becomes engaged, she is prohibited to have a relationship with any man, her husband included. And therefore, if she then does have a relationship, so whether it's with her husband or anybody else, and she has a child, that child is labeled a mamzer. That's the understanding of the true Sagonim. The Nemuke Yosef, in his commentary to the Gemara in Yevamis, Daf Chav Gimel of the Dape Arif, Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, he says as follows. He says, to explain the position of Rav, that no, the idea is as follows. That after the marriage, so the relationships that a man and woman have together as husband and wife are permitted, are allowed. But whatever takes place prior is not allowed. And because all the relationships prior to marriage are outside the bounds, so therefore, if they have a child together, then the child will have the status of a mamzer. Something that an engaged couple should not do, and there's a consequence. So now maybe we can understand in light of our understanding of this Gemara in Yevamis, this idea of what's so bad about a man and woman having a relationship and having a child before marriage, we can now understand the explanation. We can understand the statement of the Talmud Yerushalmi that ochel matzah b'erev Pesach is kabbalah arsasav b'beis chamav. What does that mean? It means as follows: that according to the Tshuvas HaGaonim, where a woman who's engaged is not allowed to have a relationship with any man, so that would suggest a parallel here, that one is not allowed to eat any form of matzah. Erev Pesach, we are supposed to be preparing for Pesach night. We are, so to speak, engaged, and we are to the matzah. We're not married to the matzah yet. We'll get married at night. But right now, it's totally off limits. So all matzah is off limits. But according to the Nemuke Yosef, that it's only about the relationship that a woman will ultimately have with her husband, her future husband. So therefore, it's only with that kind of matzah that there's a problem. So only shmura matzah would be an issue. What we see from here, though, in general, is that the Gemara and the Tur and the others who use this expression, this idea, they wanted to engender within us a sense of chavivas ha-mitzvos, an appreciation of the mitzvos, and if I can make use of a bad pun, chavivas ha-matzos, the idea about how much we should want to enjoy the matzah. Many people have the minhag, the custom, either from Chodesh Nisan or from Purim, to not eat any matzah at all, in order to build up an appetite for matzah. Matzah is so expressive. Matzah is so evocative. It brings out so many emotions and so many experiences that it's important for us to save that and to savor it and to wait to enjoy the matzah and all that it represents on the nights of the Siddharim. Hopefully we will be able to do so, and hopefully we will be able to do so in a rebuilt Beis HaMikdash. This year, obviously because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are facing circumstances that's really unprecedented for us in our lives. And while there are many, many halachos that can and perhaps should be discussed, I want to emphasize a number of ideas that are particularly relevant in this year. One of the questions that I received frequently is about dishwashers. There are different customs with regards to koshering dishwashers. In general, Sfardim are more lenient about this issue. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef has a long tshuva where he's lenient about this issue. Ashkenazim in general are more strict, they're more stringent. If a dishwasher, though, has stainless steel walls on its interior, it's not it's not porcelain. If it's porcelain, it can't be kosher. But if it's stainless steel, so I think even though generally I wouldn't necessarily advise it, but this year I think it's certainly something that would be permitted, and it should be cleaned out very, very carefully and allowed to sit for 24 hours. And the hot water, just by itself, without detergent, should be allowed to go through a full cycle at its hottest temperature in the dishwasher. I would just caution that one should not have people taking showers at the time that one does so, because if that happens, then the hot water in the dishwasher might not be as hot as it's supposed to be. Also, one should make sure that all the gunk that's in the drain is cleaned out, or at least rendered inert. Pouring a little bit of Drano would be a good idea. Don't pour too much, because otherwise it'll eat through the pipes. The racks should be kosher Pesach racks. So that's one thing to be mindful of. Chametz gomer. Chametz gomer means things which are absolute chametz. We have a concept of mechiras chametz, selling chametz. Some people don't like the idea of selling chametz at all. Some people think that that's a legal fiction, that it's a harama, and that it's not appropriate. The general custom is for people to indeed sell chametz, and generally when people sell chametz, the chametz items that they sell are things that are expensive and things that are generally admixtures of chametz, not outright chametz. Generally, one should not sell bread, one should not sell cereal, one should not sell pasta. But this year, I think that in light of what is going on and a certain amount of uncertainty, I think it's appropriate for people to sell their chametz gomer, and it's something that's different, but it's something that's appropriate for this particular year. The disposing of chametz, the beer chametz, destruction of chametz. So very often what we do is, and this is the ideal way of getting rid of the chametz, is we do sreifas chametz. We burn the chametz, and in fact, every year we have a public burning, and this way it's something that services the needs of the community. This year, that's not possible for a variety of reasons, and therefore people have to get rid of their chametz on their own. However, no one, absolutely no one, should have a fire in front of their own home or in their backyard. It poses all kinds of safety risks. People should not have fires. There's a potential of a chilul Hashem here. So I ask you please to not have your own individual burning of chametz. How should one deal with one's chametz? So first of all, proper planning prevents poor performance, and one should recognize that Erev Pesach is Wednesday. So one should really try to wind down what one is keeping until that time. Again, whatever you sell, that's not an issue. It's the chametz that you're going to keep until Wednesday. And what one should do is, one should try to very much limit the chametz that they have. Worst comes to worst, if a person has chametz, so then a person should take that chametz and place it in a garbage can and render the chametz not fit for even animal consumption. The best way to do that would be to pour some bleach over it. But one should retain a kazayas of chametz, 34 grams, and one can do beer chametz. One could destroy the chametz by flushing it down the toilet. I know that seems like an unusual way of doing things, and generally it's not what we would recommend. I also would encourage people to, if you have 34 grams kazayas of chametz, break it apart into little pieces. The last thing you want to have is to have to call a plumber on Erev Pesach. The chances are better than not that no plumber is coming, especially if you tell them that it's clogged with chametz. So one should be mindful of that. The 10 pieces that a person uses to check one's home, again, the pieces of paper that the chametz were wrapped in, so those pieces of paper can be thrown in the garbage, and even if they have a little bit of crumbs, so as I said earlier, pour a little bit of bleach on them. And again, one might have a certain amount of chametz that has to go in a waste bin, but one should not create one's own fires. So that's as far as burning chametz is concerned. Siyum b'chorim. So normally, firstborns have to fast on Erev Pesach unless there is a siyum. We are not going to have a public siyum. We're not having minyanim. We're not having any gatherings. So we will be having a Zoom siyum at 8 a.m. It will also be a siyum which you can call into if you don't have access to a computer. You'll be able to call into it. If a person cannot make their own siyum, if a person cannot participate in a Zoom siyum, of which there will be many, not only mine, but I'm sure if you look online, in case the timing of our siyum is not convenient for you, so then there is an additional option. Rav Henkin writes in a number of places that in place of a siyum, one can give tzedakah. Again, this is not what we would recommend in most years, but this year, circumstances being what they are, that would be the appropriate thing to do. I will carry out an Erev Tavshilin, Meretz Hashem, for the entire city. So as far as Erev Tavshilin, people need not be worried. Mechiras chametz, the sale of chametz. So I just told you that in addition to what you normally sell, one should also sell chametz gomer. Normally people come and we have a kinyan, we shake hands on it, we lift up a handkerchief, all those kinds of things. We're not doing that this year because of the need to socially distance. The way to deal with it is the form that was sent out says that you should return the form by email or by snail mail, and there's a brief declaration which is included that you should write that I recognize the severity of this issue and I appoint Rabbi Shmidman to be my agent. For those who want to, there is another option, and that is that if you have another person in your household, so that person can lift up a handkerchief and can on your behalf acquire the chametz on my behalf. So that individual who acquires the chametz on my behalf, so I will be able to sell the chametz for you. That's if a person wants to take an additional step in this regard. But the point is that it's not necessary to come in person to have to make a kinyan, and we're not doing that this year. As far as Hallel at night, many people have the custom, Nusach Sfard in particular, to recite Hallel on the nights of Pesach. Although one is allowed to do so, this is generally something that we do b'tzibur. It's something that we do in a public way. It's part of Persumei Nisa. I think the proper thing is if people are davening at home, people should not recite Hallel. As far as Tal, so Tfilas Tal, normally we recite an elongated piyut on Pesach, praying for dew. We don't do that this year. Again, if a person wants to say Tfilas Tal, so there's probably permissibility. There are authorities who maintain that actually Tfilas Tal might be considered to be somewhat of an interruption, a hefsek, so there's reason maybe not to. But one thing is for sure, that when you daven your private musaf, so you should say Mashi V'Roch Marida Tal. That would be the proper thing to do. As far as kitnios, so Ashkenazim don't have kitnios on Pesach as a general rule. This year there are a couple of things to be mindful of. If people have health issues, and for example there's reason to take vitamins and supplements that have kitnios in them, and people are receiving medical advice that they should do so. So because they're vitamins and supplements which are generally not necessary, if they were kitnios, we might advise not to do so. This year I think it's appropriate. For people who suffer from Crohn's, so there is enhanced milk that is kitnios that some patients would like to be able to consume on Pesach. And there are two questions associated with this. One is, the fact that it's kitnius, can they consume it, and the issue of having to wait 6 hours after meat. Is that necessary? So I would say for a Crohn's patient suffering on Pesach, this kitnius enhanced milk would be permissible, and it would not be required to wait the entire 6 hours. They could just wait 1 hour. A final issue to mention is Attar Nedarim. Why do I talk about Attar Nedarim now? The idea of releasing ourselves from vows is something that we normally do before Rosh Hashanah, before Yom Kippurim. Why am I talking about this now? Because as a general principle, if a person practices a minhag on Hagatova, and they want to stop, then they have to be released from their vow. They have to be matir neder. The Dogel Mervava points out that when a person takes upon oneself a neder, so that person does it with the presumption that the world is going to be regular. But if the world is irregular like it is now, so then one is not necessarily required to maintain one's neder. So I say that because if there's something which is a minhag, not a din, you have to know what the difference between a halacha is and a custom. Dinim still need to be fulfilled. But there are certain minhagim. For example, some people have the custom to eat shmur matzah all of Pesach. Or some people have the custom to eat gebrot for Pesach. This year, because of the coronavirus, if a person wants to not follow those minhagim, but will ultimately go back to their family's minhagim, so then a person does not have to be stringent, a person does not have to eat the gebrot, a person does not have to eat shmur matzah all throughout Pesach, and it will not be necessary for a person to have hataras nedarim. I want to just conclude with a very, very brief idea and a story which some of you might know. The brief idea is that I spoke earlier about the importance of eating matzah on Pesach at the Seder night and eating it with an appetite and making sure not to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. It's our general custom to not eat any kind of matzah on Erev Pesach. It's fascinating that the Jewish people were commanded to eat matzah already in Mitzrayim. They were told, matzah sumrom yochluhu, that you should eat the Korban Pesach, you should eat it with matzahs and maror. And yet, we generally say that why do we eat matzahs? Because the Jewish people, they put these dough cakes on their backs, and it didn't have time to bake into bread. It was only matzah that it turned into. But that part of the story didn't yet happen. So how could we be commanded to eat matzahs if that didn't happen? So I think we see a profound idea that it's not enough for a person to just do something in the moment. A person has to have an element of anticipation for that which is important, for that which is sacred. Yeah, it's true, the story of going out of Mitzrayim didn't yet happen. They were still in Egypt. They weren't marching out with the dough on their shoulders, on their backs. And yet, there was already, if you will, a taste of matzah in their mouth. They were already anticipating the matzah, which represents geula, which represents redemption. The Barbanel in Parshas Bo points out tahara and tamimos, that it represents purity, something which the Jewish people were longing to have. And I think in many ways, we too, as much as we are entrenched in this pandemic and we are living in some ways from minute to minute, nonetheless, we have to recognize there's a future and we will one day get out of this mess. And I conclude with a story involving the Bluzhever Rebbe who made it through the Holocaust. He was a great leader during the Holocaust. If you want to see a lot of stories about the Bluzhever Rebbe and his experiences during the Holocaust, Yafa Eliach wrote a book in which she recounted many of the stories. And one story about the Bluzhever Rebbe involves the woman who he married after the war. His first family was decimated in the Holocaust, but he ultimately did get married after the Holocaust. And he was asked, how did you know that this was the woman? And how did you have the ability, the courage to go forward? Bluzhever Rebbe went through a remarkable number of very difficult trials in the Holocaust. We don't compare people's experiences, but his experiences were really, really very trying. And he shared the following story, that when he was in the concentration camps, it was before Pesach, and he decided that he wants to try to get matzos. So they approached the commander, and he said, they would like to make matzos for Pesach. So the commander said, okay, I'll take your request to the higher authorities. As soon as the Bluzhever Rebbe had put in that request, he realized maybe that was not really a smart idea. That's just only going to encourage the Nazis, Yimach Shemam V'Zichram, to be even more cruel, to be more brutal. But nonetheless, surprisingly, the commander came back and said, okay, whoever wants to bake matzahs should sign up. So the Bluzhever Rebbe and a couple of other daring souls did so. Again, after they did so, they had a measure of regret and remorse, because they thought maybe this is just some way for us to be singled out, to be tortured, to be killed. But to their amazement, they were actually granted the right to make matzahs. Bluzhever Rebbe was such a tzaddik that he had malachim watching over him. He had Kadosh Baruch Hu somehow made it happen. Anyway, they were able to bake a few matzahs, and you can imagine what happened. The supply was small and the demand was great. And whatever we think that we have challenges of people trying to get things from Amazon, it doesn't compare with what they were going through at that time. And everybody was arguing, I should get the matzahs because of this, and I should get the matzahs because of that reason. And this woman comes forward and said, my children should get matzahs. The Bluzhever Rebbe and everybody else looked at this woman and said, what do you mean? Your children aren't even bar mitzvah. They don't have a chiyuv. They don't have an obligation in the mitzvah of matzah. And the woman looked at the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, they're children. They need to know what matzah is. They will one day come out of here and they will have to know what a seder is. And they'll have to know what matzah is. And the Bluzhever Rebbe and everybody stood there astonished. Because up until that point, not one person had ever bothered to think about the future. They were just so focused on the moment. They were just so focused on the present. The mitzvah of matzah was given to us in Mitzrayim so that we should know no matter what sorrows come our way, no matter what holocausts, no matter what coronavirus, we have to think for the future. And yes, just as they got out of all of those terrible situations, we too, we will emerge from this terrible challenge, and we will one day eat the matzahs together with the Korban Pesach in a rebuilt Beis Hamikdash. Amen.